Good morning. Today is Wednesday, January 15th, 2025. There is a single verse near the beginning of this week's Torah portion, the Parsha of Shemot, that contains so much wisdom, so much help in navigating life. I would recommend it as the motto of the Jewish people, especially now. Yes, of course, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is very good. Am Yisrael Chai is very good. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is very good. But this verse, I think, has a lot to recommend it as our motto, especially today. And the pasuk is near the beginning of the Parsha, when the Jewish people start to be persecuted in Egypt. And the Torah says, V'chasher yanu oso, and just as they, the Egyptians, persecuted us, Kain yirbe v'chein yifrots. In similar measure did we increase and did we flourish. In other words, in terms of the narrative of the Parsha, the challenge that we, the Jewish people, faced in Egypt had the opposite effect of what was intended. Because the persecution in Egypt was intended to make us smaller or weaker, and we might expect that such persecution might have that effect, but it didn't. It had just the opposite effect. And the words v'chasher mean just as. In other words, as a direct result of the yanuoso, to the exact same measure, kain yirbe v'chein yifrots, did we increase and did we flourish. So the tactic had the exact opposite effect. And I want to point out that this pasuk, this verse, is not just a description of what happened. Kain yirbe v'chein yifrot is in the future tense. And the Talmud says, the Gemara, Masechta Sota says, Ruach HaKodesh mevas rasan. This is the divine spirit giving news to the Jewish people. That on the one hand, yes, it is describing what happened in Egypt, yes, but at the same time, it is describing what will happen in every generation of Jewish history. And it is giving us this lesson for navigating life, again, in every Jewish generation of Jewish history. No one wants challenges, no one wants difficulties, crises, persecutions. No one wants that. But what this pasuk is teaching us is, if we could just train ourselves not only to ask why, of course, we ask why, it's natural. But if we could train ourselves not only to ask why, but to ask, what do I learn from this? How do I grow from this? How do I use this going forward? In other words, what muscles will I develop by pushing against this resistance that I'm facing? Then, everything that happens to us, and the negative things we certainly do not want to happen, but everything that happens to us can better us. We wouldn't choose it. We don't want it. We don't understand it. But we shouldn't let it go to waste. Henry Ellis, the British scholar, once wrote, "The promised land is always lies on the other side of a wilderness. Amanda Gorman, an incredible poet I have quoted to you before, wrote, "Our scars are the brightest parts of us." And Rabbi Jonathan Sacks traces the way that this actually works in Jewish history, because Jewish history is not just a story of Jews enduring catastrophes that would have ended and have ended all sorts of other groups and societies, but it is rather, Jewish history is rather the story that after every disaster, Jews renew ourselves. After the death of King Solomon, there was a division of the kingdom, and that was a terrible thing. And at the same time, from that terrible era of division of the Jews into two separate kingdoms, almost civil war, came the great prophets, Amos and Hosea and Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu. After the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, the terrible, terrible Churban, came the exile in Bavel, Babylonia, with its renewal of Torah in the life of the nation. With the destruction of the second temple, the Bayis Sheni, by the Romans about 2,000 years ago. That was followed by this immense literature of rabbinic Judaism, the Mishnah, the Midrash, the Talmud. From the Crusades came Hasidei Ashkenaz, a flourishing of Jews in those parts of Europe. Following the Spanish expulsion, we have the growth of this mystic circle in Tzfat in the northern part of Israel. In the 1600s and 1700s, when there was in East Europe terrible persecution and pogroms and poverty, out of that came the Hasidic movement, the revival of a grassroots Judaism. And the worst tragedy of all in human terms, the Holocaust. After that comes the rebirth of the State of Israel, the greatest collective Jewish affirmation of life in more than 2,000 years. Rabbi Shlomo Riskin told this story. It could be apocryphal. The story goes that the only man, the only Jew who ever dared the unthinkable and laughed when Hitler talked. This Jew was seized from the audience and brought before the dictator for an explanation. And this Jew said, "Purim we have because of Haman. And Pesach we have because of Paro. I can't wait to find out what holiday we will have when we get rid of you." There is something, Rabbi Sacks says, that is profoundly spiritual in this ability to transform the terrible moments of life into spurs to creativity. It's as if there is a deep voice within us, perhaps a voice coming from God, which says to us, you are in this situation, bad though it is, because there is a task to perform, a skill to acquire, a strength to develop, a lesson to learn. And whenever we lose heart, as it so often happens today, and wonder when will it end, that's when we need to remember these words. v'chasher yanu oso, ken yirbe v'chen yifrotz. The more that we were oppressed, the more we increased, and the more we will flourish. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.